The chains rattled as Lydia Foster stepped onto the auction platform in the center of Marysville, Utah. Her hands bound before her, and her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. It was September 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty Main Street, where townsfolk had gathered not for cattle or horses, but to witness something far more disturbing. Her father stood to the side, his weathered face carved with shame and resignation, while the Brennan family patriarch sat in a wooden chair near the platform, his cold eyes gleaming with satisfaction. This was how blood debts were paid in some corners of the West, where old grudges ran deeper than any river and justice wore whatever face men with power decided to give it. Thomas Vaughn had ridden into Marysville that morning with no intention of staying longer than it took to resupply and water his horse. He was a ranch hand drifting between jobs, a man of 24 years who had learned to keep his head down and his business his own. But when he heard the commotion in the street and saw the young woman being led to that platform like property, something inside him twisted hard. He pushed through the crowd, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. The auctioneer was explaining the situation in a voice that tried to make the whole sorry affair sound legal and proper. The Foster family owes a debt of $300 to the Brennan family, incurred through damages to property and livestock over the past 5 years of dispute. As payment cannot be rendered in currency, Lydia Foster, age 22, will be sold into servitude to settle the account. The Brennan family has first right of refusal. Lydia's eyes swept across the crowd, searching for something she could not name. Help, perhaps, or at least one face that showed the horror she felt. Her dark blonde hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her simple cotton dress was dusty from the road. She had been raised on a small ranch outside town, the only daughter among 3 brothers. When the feud with the Brennans had started over a disputed water source, she had been just 17. Now, after years of escalating violence and sabotage, her father had finally broken. He could not pay what the territorial judge had ordered, and so she had become the payment. Thomas saw her face, saw the quiet dignity she was fighting to maintain even as her world collapsed. He had $260 to his name, saved over 3 years of hard work and careful living. It was supposed to buy him a piece of land, a start toward something better than drifting. But he found himself stepping forward before he could think it through. "I will bid," he called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. The auctioneer looked surprised. "Sir, this is a debt settlement, not a standard auction." "The Brennans have first right to—" "I heard you," Thomas interrupted, climbing up onto the platform. He looked directly at Silas Brennan, the old man who had orchestrated this whole ugly business. "But I also know that the judge said the debt had to be settled, not that it had to be settled with you. If someone else pays the Foster family's debt, the law is satisfied and you cannot claim otherwise." Silas Brennan rose slowly from his chair, his face darkening. "Who the hell are you to interfere in family business? My name is Thomas Vaughn, and I am making this everybody's business right now." He turned to the auctioneer. $300. I will pay it in full cash right now. The debt is settled and this woman goes free." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Lydia stared at him, this stranger with sun-browned skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, his gray eyes fierce with something she could not quite read. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun on his hip, but there was nothing threatening in his posture, only determination. Silas Brennan stepped closer, his hand hovering near his own weapon. "You do not know what you are doing, boy. This feud has been going on longer than you have been alive." Thomas met his gaze without flinching. "Then maybe it is time someone ended it. This ends today." He pulled a worn leather pouch from his jacket and counted out bills and coins onto the platform. $300. Count it yourself. The auctioneer looked between Thomas and Silas, sweat beading on his forehead. The lawman standing nearby, Sheriff Caldwell, moved forward and examined the money. "It is all here," he confirmed. "The legal requirement is met. The debt is paid." Silas's face twisted with rage. "This is not over, Foster. You hear me? This is not over." But Thomas was already unlocking the chains from Lydia's wrists. His hands were gentle despite the rough calluses, and when the metal fell away, she rubbed her chafed skin and looked up at him with eyes that shimmered with unshed tears. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. "You do not even know me." "Because it was wrong," he said simply, "and because sometimes a man has to do what is right even when it costs him everything he has." Her father pushed through the crowd, his face anguished. "Lydia, I am so sorry. I tried everything else. I tried," she embraced him quickly, feeling his shoulders shake. "I know, Papa, I know." But her eyes kept returning to Thomas, to this stranger who had just changed the course of her life with a decision that must have taken all of 5 seconds to make. Sheriff Caldwell cleared his throat. "The matter is settled legally. Everyone disperse. Brennan's, if you have a problem with the judge's ruling, take it up in court, not in my street." The crowd began to break up, but Thomas could feel eyes on his back, hostile and calculating. He had just made enemies of one of the most powerful families in the valley, and he knew it. But when he looked at Lydia's face, at the relief and confusion and gratitude warring there, he could not bring himself to regret it. "You just spent all your money on me," she said as they walked away from the platform. "What were you saving for? Land, a ranch of my own eventually." He shrugged, trying to make it seem less important than it was. "There will be other opportunities. That is not fair to you." Her voice was thick with emotion. "You should not have had to. What is done is done." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Listen, I do not expect anything from you. You are free now. The debt is paid. You can go wherever you want, do whatever you want." She stood in the dusty street, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, and felt the full weight of that freedom settle on her shoulders. Free. She was actually free. But free to do what? Her family's ranch was mortgaged to the breaking point. The feud with the Brennans was clearly not finished, despite what Thomas had said. And this man had just given up his dreams for her. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted quietly. "My father is barely holding onto the ranch. My brothers are trying to keep it running, but with the Brennans sabotaging our water access and cutting our fences, it is only a matter of time before we lose everything anyway." Thomas thought for a moment, his mind working through options. "I was heading north, toward the Colorado border. There is ranch work up there and the pay is decent. You could come with me if you want. I would see that you are safe until you figure out what you want to do next." It was an impulsive offer, and they both knew it. But Lydia felt something stir in her chest, something like hope mixed with a curious warmth when she looked at him. He had kind eyes, despite the hardness that life on the frontier put in every person, and he had saved her from a fate she could not bear to think about. "I would like that," she said. "At least until I can repay you somehow. You do not owe me anything. I owe you everything." She said it with such fierce conviction that he had no response. They made arrangements quickly. Lydia said goodbye to her father and brothers, promising to write when she could. Her father pressed what little money he had into her hands, despite her protests, and her brothers gave her a horse and supplies. By the time the sun was setting, she and Thomas were riding out of Marysvale together, two near strangers bound by an extraordinary act and the uncertain road ahead. They rode in companionable silence for the first few miles, the landscape around them painted in shades of orange and purple by the dying light. The Utah Territory was beautiful in its harshness, all red rock and scrub brush and endless sky. Thomas led them to a protected hollow near a creek where they could camp for the night, and they worked together to set up a simple camp without needing many words. As darkness fell and stars emerged in breathtaking numbers overhead, they sat by a small fire and finally began to talk. Really talk, not just the practical exchanges of the trail. Lydia told him about growing up on the ranch, about how the feud with the Brennans had started over a disputed property line and access to a spring that fed both properties. How it had escalated year by year until men were dying and livestock were being poisoned, and her family was drowning in legal fees and damages. "My mother died when I was 15, she said, staring into the flames. "She was caught in the crossfire during one of the confrontations. After that, my father became obsessed with making the Brennans pay, but they had more money, more influence. Every legal battle we lost only dug us deeper into debt." Thomas listened, his expression grave. "I am sorry. That is a heavy burden for anyone to carry, especially for so many years." "What about you?" she asked. "Where is your family?" His jaw tightened slightly. "My parents had a farm in Missouri. My father died when I was 12 and my mother remarried a year later. My stepfather was not a kind man. I left when I was 16 and have been on my own since." "That is 8 years of drifting, working ranches from Kansas to California and everywhere in between. That sounds lonely." "It has been." He met her eyes across the fire. "But you learn to find your own way. And sometimes you find that the family you choose means more than the one you were born into." She felt a connection forming between them, delicate as spider silk but surprisingly strong. Here was a man who understood loss, who knew what it meant to be adrift in the world. And yet he had given up everything to help her, a stranger. What kind of person did that? They talked late into the night, long after the fire had burned down to embers. She learned that he loved horses and had a gift for training them, that he read every book he could get his hands on despite limited schooling, that he dreamed of a place where he could build something lasting. He learned that she could shoot better than her brothers, that she had a talent for healing sick animals, that she had a quick wit and a laugh that seemed to light up the darkness around them. When they finally settled into their bedrolls on opposite sides of the dying fire, Lydia lay awake for a long time, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. This morning she had been facing a nightmare, and now she was lying under the stars with a kind and decent man who had saved her. It felt like the beginning of something, though she was afraid to name what that something might be. They traveled for 3 days, making their way north through increasingly rugged terrain. Thomas proved to be good company, patient and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that surprised her. He treated her with unfailing respect, never presuming on their situation or making her feel uncomfortable. At night, they would make camp and talk for hours, learning each other's stories, each other's dreams. On the 4th day, they reached a town called Cedar Creek, nestled in a valley with actual trees and a river that ran year-round. Thomas knew of a large ranch outside town that was always looking for good workers, and he thought they might both find employment there. The ranch was called the Triple Bar, owned by a widower named Robert Harrison who ran cattle and horses across several thousand acres. Harrison was a gruff man in his 50s with sharp eyes that assessed them both carefully when they rode up to his main house. "You looking for work?" he asked Thomas. "Yes, sir. I am a good hand with horses and I am not afraid of hard work. This is Lydia Foster. She is an excellent rider and knows ranch work as well." Harrison's gaze moved to Lydia and she met it steadily. "Can you cook?" he asked. "Yes, sir. And I can mend tack, help with foaling, and handle a rifle if there is trouble with predators." A hint of approval crossed his weathered face. "I lost my housekeeper last month, and my cook is threatening to quit if she has to do all the housework too. I can offer you room and board plus $20 a month if you are willing to handle the house and help with the horses when needed. As for you," he said to Thomas, "I can pay $30 a month plus room and board if you are as good with horses as you claim." They accepted immediately. It was more than fair, and the ranch itself was beautiful, with well-maintained buildings and healthy stock. Harrison set them up in separate cabins near the bunkhouse, simple but clean structures with real beds and wood stoves. After weeks of uncertainty, it felt like a small miracle. Lydia threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction and the purpose. She managed the main house, cooking meals for Harrison and the handful of other ranch hands, keeping everything clean and organized. But she also spent time in the corrals with Thomas, watching him work with the horses. He had a gift for it, she realized. He moved with a calm confidence that the animals responded to, never rough or impatient, always reading their body language and adjusting his approach accordingly. "You are staring," he said one afternoon, glancing over at her with a small smile. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I am watching you work. There is a difference." "Is there?" The smile widened, and she found herself smiling back. The easy camaraderie they had developed on the trail was deepening into something more, though neither of them spoke of it directly. But she would catch him watching her when he thought she was not looking, and her heart would skip in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. She found excuses to bring him coffee when he was working late in the barn, and he found reasons to check if she needed anything from town when he went for supplies. One evening in late October, nearly 6 weeks after they had arrived at the Triple Bar, Thomas found her sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. He hesitated, then came and sat beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "Are you happy here?" he asked quietly. She considered the question seriously. "Yes, happier than I have been in a long time. It feels good to work hard and see the results of that work, to not be looking over my shoulder all the time." "I am glad." He was silent for a moment, then said, "I have been thinking about what comes next. Harrison offered me a partnership if I stay through the spring. He wants to expand the horse breeding operation, and he needs someone who can handle the training program." "That is wonderful, Thomas. That is the kind of opportunity you were hoping for." "It is, but I wanted to talk to you about it first." He turned to face her, his gray eyes serious. "Because what I really want is to build something with you, Lydia, not just a ranch or a business, but a life. I know it has only been a couple of months, and maybe it is too soon to say this, but I am falling in love with you. I think I started falling that first day in Marysvale when I saw you on that platform and knew I could not let that happen to you." Her breath caught in her throat. She had known her feelings were growing, but hearing him say it aloud made it real in a way that was almost overwhelming. "Thomas, you do not have to say anything right now," he interrupted gently. "I just wanted you to know. I will wait as long as you need. I just want you to be sure of what you want, not feel obligated because of what I did." She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I do not feel obligated. I feel grateful, yes, but more than that, I feel like I found something I did not even know I was looking for. You are one of the best men I have ever known, Thomas Vaughn. You are kind and brave and decent, and when I am with you, I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years. I am falling in love with you too." The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with emotion. "Then we will build something together," he said. "Whatever that looks like, wherever it takes us." They sat together as darkness fell, hands clasped, talking about possibilities and dreams. Harrison's partnership offer could be the start of something bigger. Maybe in a few years they could have their own place, raise horses and cattle, build the kind of life that neither of them had dared hope for when they were alone. The next few months passed in a blur of hard work and growing intimacy. Thomas accepted Harrison's partnership, and Lydia continued managing the house while also becoming more involved in the horse operation. They courted properly, with evening walks and conversations that lasted long into the night, with stolen kisses in the barn that made her feel like a girl again, despite everything she had been through. By Christmas, the entire ranch knew they were together, and the other hands teased Thomas mercilessly in the way of men who were happy for one of their own. Harrison seemed pleased, often remarking that the ranch ran better with both of them there, that they made a good team. On a cold January evening in 1879, Thomas asked her to marry him. They were in the barn, checking on a mare that was close to foaling, and he just turned to her with snow dusting his dark hair and said, "Marry me, Lydia. Make this official. Build this life with me." She said yes without hesitation, and they kissed surrounded by the warm smell of hay and horses while the snow fell softly outside. They were married in Cedar Creek in February, a simple ceremony with Harrison and the ranch hands as witnesses. Lydia wore a dress she had sewn herself from blue calico, and Thomas wore his best shirt and a jacket borrowed from Harrison. When the circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and she felt the last of her old life fall away. They moved into one of the larger cabins on the ranch, making it their own with furniture Thomas built and curtains Lydia sewed. At night, they would lie in bed and talk about their plans, about the foals they would raise and the land they might one day own. Thomas was a gentle and attentive husband, patient with her inexperience, and she fell more in love with him every day. But happiness on the frontier was always fragile, and the past had a way of catching up. In early April, a rider came to the Triple Bar looking for Lydia. It was one of her brothers, Daniel, and his face was grim. The Brennans had made a final move against the Foster ranch, calling in the mortgage and seizing the property. Her father and brothers were being forced off the land that had been in their family for 2 generations. Lydia was devastated. Thomas held her while she cried, then made a decision. "We are going back," he said. "We will go to Marysvale and see what can be done." "There is nothing to be done," she said bitterly. "The Brennans have won, maybe, but we owe it to your family to try. And besides, I made a promise that day in town. I said this ends today. It is time to make sure that is true." They left 2 days later with Harrison's blessing and a promise that their jobs would be waiting when they returned. The ride south to Marysvale took a week, and every mile brought a tightness to Lydia's chest. She had not been back since the day Thomas had bought her freedom, and she was afraid of what they would find. The town looked the same, but the atmosphere was different. There was a tension in the air, a sense of something waiting to break. They found her father and brothers staying in a boarding house, their belongings piled in a wagon outside. Her father looked like he had aged 10 years in the 6 months since she had seen him last. "Lydia," he said, embracing her tightly, "you should not have come back here. It is not safe." "We came to help," Thomas said, shaking hands with her brothers. "Tell us what happened." The story was as Lydia had feared. The Brennans had purchased the mortgage from the bank and called it in immediately. The family had 30 days to vacate the property or be forcibly removed. That deadline was in 3 days. "There has to be something we can do," Lydia insisted. "Some legal recourse." "We have been to every lawyer in 2 counties," her oldest brother, Michael, said. They either will not take the case or say it is perfectly legal. The Brennans made sure everything was done by the book this time. Thomas thought for a long moment, then said, "What if we paid off the mortgage?" "How much is owed?" Her father looked at him with hollow eyes. $1,200. It might as well be 12,000 for all the chance we have of raising it. Thomas exchanged a look with Lydia. "I have been saving my pay from Harrison. I have about $300. And Harrison might be willing to extend a loan if we can make a good case for it." "We cannot ask you to do that," her father protested. "You have done enough, more than enough. You are not asking, I am offering." Thomas stood straighter. "When I married your daughter, your family became my family. And I meant what I said that day in the street. This ends today. One way or another, the Brennan feud ends now." They spent the next 2 days working frantically. Thomas sent a telegram to Harrison explaining the situation and requesting a loan. To their relief, Harrison wired back agreeing to loan them $1,000 against Thomas's partnership share, payable over 5 years. With that and their savings combined, they had enough to pay off the mortgage. But there was a problem. The Brennans were refusing to accept payment and cancel the foreclosure. Silas Brennan made it clear that he did not want money, he wanted the Foster family destroyed. Thomas realized they needed leverage, and that meant digging into the Brennan family's business dealings. He spent hours in the land office and the courthouse, going through records with Lydia's brother Michael, who had a head for figures. What they found was damning. The Brennans had been systematically buying up properties around the valley, often using threats and intimidation to force sales at unfair prices. More importantly, they had falsified several boundary surveys to claim water rights that were not legally theirs. Armed with this information, Thomas requested a meeting with Silas Brennan. The old man agreed, perhaps out of curiosity to see what game Thomas thought he was playing. They met in the Brennan ranch house, a sprawling structure that spoke of wealth built on the backs of others. Silas sat behind a massive desk, his sons flanking him like guard dogs. "You have nerve coming here, Vaughn. You cost me satisfaction once. You will not do it again." Thomas laid the documents on the desk. "These are copies of land surveys from the territorial office. They show that your family has been claiming water rights based on fraudulent boundary markers. If these were presented to a judge, you would lose not just those water rights, but possibly face criminal charges. You would certainly lose the political influence that has kept you protected all these years." Silas's face darkened as he looked through the papers. "Where did you get these?" "Public records. Anyone could have found them if they had been looking. I was looking." Thomas leaned forward. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to accept payment for the Foster mortgage and release the property back to the family. You are going to leave them alone from this day forward. In exchange, these documents stay between us, and no charges are filed. You are blackmailing me." Silas's voice was cold as winter stone. "I am offering you a way out that lets you keep your reputation and your holdings. But if you refuse, I will take these to every newspaper and every judge in the territory. The Foster family has nothing left to lose. You have everything to lose." Think about that. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Silas's sons looked ready to draw their guns, but the old man held up a hand. He was calculating, weighing his options, and Thomas could see the moment he realized he was beaten. "You are making a powerful enemy," Silas said finally. "No, I am ending a feud that should have ended years ago." Thomas gathered the papers. "You have until tomorrow at noon to have the mortgage cancellation papers drawn up. If they are not ready, these documents go to the territorial governor." "Do we understand each other?" Silas nodded once sharply, his eyes burning with impotent rage. Thomas and Lydia left the ranch house together, both of them shaking with adrenaline. "That was incredibly dangerous," she said when they were out of earshot. "He could have killed you right there." But he did not, because men like him only respect power, and for the first time someone had power over him. Thomas took her hand. "It is over, Lydia, really over." The next day at noon they met at the courthouse. Silas Brennan arrived with his lawyer and the mortgage cancellation documents. The Foster family paid the sum in full, and the deed to their ranch was returned to them. Silas looked at Thomas one last time, something like grudging respect in his cold eyes, then walked away without another word. Her family could not believe it. Her father wept openly, embracing Thomas like a son. Her brothers were jubilant, already making plans to rebuild what had been damaged over the years of fighting. Lydia felt like a weight she had been carrying since childhood had finally been lifted. They stayed in Marysvale for another week, helping her family settle back into the ranch and making sure the Brennans honored the agreement. True to his word, Silas left them alone, apparently too busy dealing with his own legal troubles to continue the feud. The fraudulent surveys became known despite Thomas's promise, leaked by someone in the land office who had his own grudge against the Brennans. Within months, the family would lose much of their ill-gotten influence, though they remained wealthy. When Thomas and Lydia finally rode back to Cedar Creek, it felt like returning home after a long war. Harrison welcomed them back with relief, saying the place had not run nearly as well without them. They fell back into their routines, but everything felt different now. Lighter. Like they could finally breathe without waiting for the next disaster. That summer, Lydia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with a joy so profound it was almost painful. They would have a child who would grow up in peace, without the shadow of blood feuds and old hatreds. Thomas built a cradle with his own hands, carving their initials and the baby's expected birth date into the headboard. Their son was born in February of 1880, exactly 2 years after they had been married. They named him James Robert Vaughn, after Thomas's father and Harrison, who had become like a father to them both. The old rancher was delighted to have a baby on the ranch again, often holding little James and telling him stories about the old days. As James grew, Thomas and Lydia continued building their life at the Triple Bar. Harrison made good on his partnership promise, and by 1882, Thomas owned a full quarter of the ranch. They expanded the horse breeding operation, gaining a reputation for quality stock throughout the territory. Lydia managed the business side of things, discovering she had a knack for figures and negotiation that made them profitable even in lean years. In 1883, their second child was born, a daughter they named Caroline Grace. She had her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes, and she was a firecracker from the moment she could walk. Thomas doted on both his children, teaching James to ride almost before the boy could walk and making sure Caroline knew she was just as valued as her brother. Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1885, leaving his portion of the ranch to Thomas and Lydia in his will. It was a staggering act of generosity, but as the old man had said in his final days, "You too made this place a home again. It is only right that it stays in the family." By 1890, the Triple Bar was one of the most successful ranches in the region, running thousands of head of cattle and supplying horses to the army and to ranches across 3 territories. Thomas and Lydia had built something extraordinary, but more important than the success was what they had built together. A marriage based on love and respect, a family that was healthy and happy, a home that was filled with laughter and warmth. Lydia's father and brothers thrived on their recovered ranch, finally free from the burden of the feud. They visited often, and the children loved spending time with their grandfather and uncles, learning the stories of the old days. The Brennans faded into obscurity, their power broken by their own greed and corruption. On a warm evening in June of 1891, Thomas and Lydia sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching James and Caroline play in the yard while the sun set behind the mountains. It had been 13 years since that day in Marysvale when he had stepped onto that platform and changed both their lives forever. "You ever regret it?" Lydia asked, her hand in his. "Giving up your savings that day, changing all your plans?" Thomas smiled, the same gentle smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Not for a single second. That money bought me something worth far more than land. It bought me you and this life and everything we have built together." She leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children play in the golden light. "I love you, Thomas Vaughn. I have loved you since the moment you said this ends today and made it true. I love you too. Always have, always will." Their third child, a son they named William, was born the following spring, much to James's delight at having a brother. The ranch continued to prosper, and as the century turned and the Wild West began to fade into legend, Thomas and Lydia remained, their love story one for the ages. They grew old together, watching their children grow and have families of their own. James took over the main operations of the ranch, proving to have his father's gift with horses and his mother's business acumen. Caroline married a lawyer from Denver and gave them grandchildren who visited every summer. William became a veterinarian, using his skills to help ranchers throughout the region. On quiet evenings, Thomas and Lydia would still sit on that porch and remember the beginning, when they had been two broken people brought together by circumstance and desperation. They had built something beautiful from that terrible day, proving that sometimes the worst moments could lead to the greatest blessings. Lydia never forgot what it felt like to stand on that platform in chains, or the moment she saw Thomas step forward out of the crowd. He had saved her in every way a person could be saved, and she had saved him right back, giving him the home and family he had always dreamed of but never dared hope for. Thomas never regretted the choice he made that September day in 1878. Every time he looked at Lydia, every time he held his children or grandchildren, he knew it had been the easiest decision of his life. Some things were worth more than money or land. Some things, like love and family and doing what was right, were beyond price. The feud that had nearly destroyed Lydia's family became a cautionary tale told throughout the region, a reminder of how hatred and pride could consume everything if left unchecked. But it was also the beginning of a love story that would last a lifetime, proof that one person's courage could change everything. As the years passed, and they watched the new century unfold from their porch on the Triple Bar Ranch, Thomas and Lydia held hands and counted their blessings. They had faced down hatred and violence and emerged victorious. They had built a legacy not just of land and livestock, but of love that would echo through generations. Their grandchildren would tell their own children about the day Grandpa Thomas paid $300 to free Grandma Lydia from being sold to settle a blood feud, about how he stood on that platform and declared that the cycle of violence ended that day. They would tell about the love that grew from that dramatic beginning, about the ranch that became a refuge and a home, about two people who refused to let the cruelty of the world make them cruel. In the end, that was their greatest victory. Not the ranch or the money or the success, but the fact that they had loved each other through every trial and hardship, that they had raised children who knew they were loved and valued, that they had proven kindness was stronger than hatred. On a spring morning in 1925, Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 71, with Lydia holding his hand. She followed him 6 months later, unable or unwilling to live without the man who had been her partner, her love, and her best friend for nearly 47 years. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under the endless sky they had both loved so much. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood at the graveside and remembered them with love and gratitude, knowing they owed their very existence to one man's courage and one woman's resilience on a dusty street in Marysville, Utah, so many years before. The story of Thomas and Lydia Vaughn became the kind of legend the West was built on, but to those who knew them, it was never just a story. It was a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to the strength it takes to stand up against injustice, and to the beautiful things that can grow when two people commit to building a life together against all odds. The Triple Bar Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, and on that hill where Thomas and Lydia rested, their descendants would sometimes come to sit and remember. They would think about that September day in 1878, about chains and auctions and a young cowboy who had $300 and a heart brave enough to say this ends today. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with the words that had become the family's motto, carved into the headstone that marked where Thomas and Lydia lay together at last. This ends today. Not with hatred, not with violence, not with the cruelty of the past, but with love, with courage, with the promise of a better tomorrow. That was their legacy, and it endured long after the Wild West had faded into memory. A reminder that sometimes the greatest act of courage is not drawing a gun or winning a fight, but opening your heart and choosing love when the whole world seems bent on choosing hate. Thomas Vaughn had made that choice on a dusty street in a small Utah town, and it had changed everything. Lydia had been being sold to settle a family feud, reduced to property in the eyes of men who valued pride more than people. The cowboy paid the price, every dollar he had saved for his own dreams, and said those 4 words that would echo through time. This ends today, and it had. The feud ended, the hatred ended, the cycle of violence that had consumed 2 families for years finally broke. In its place grew something infinitely more valuable. A love that lasted a lifetime, a family built on respect and kindness, a home that was a refuge from the harshness of the world. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on the land in the late 20th century, still raised horses and cattle under that same endless sky. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the light turned gold and the wind whispered through the grass, they would swear they could feel the presence of Thomas and Lydia, still watching over the place they had built with their own hands and their unbreakable love. The story never grew old in the telling. Each generation found new meaning in it, new inspiration in the courage it took for Thomas to step forward that day, new hope in the love that grew from such dark beginnings. It reminded them that no matter how bleak things seemed, one person could make a difference. One choice, made in a moment of clarity and courage, could change everything. And so the legacy lived on, not just in the land or the ranch or the family name, but in the hearts of everyone who heard the story and believed, even for a moment, that love really could conquer all. That sometimes, when the world seemed darkest, a hero would emerge not with guns blazing but with money in hand and conviction in his heart, ready to say the words that needed saying. This ends today. And it did.